The New Testament is a collection of Christian writings formed over the first 4 centuries of the Church's existence. But how did this set of documents, written in tumultuous times, come to be recognized as sacred and authoritative? What we call canonization is the process by which a collection of sacred books first emerged and then later came to be accepted as the universal standard of faith and practice for the Christian churches. Canonization thus refers to the formation of the Christian canon comprising of the Old and the New Testaments. While the formation of the canon can be attributed to divine providence, it was also a very human process. The making of the canon was a matter of authors writing books, those books being edited, circulated, collected, until they were finally ratified as the officially recognized list of sacred writings that Christians held to be authoritative for life and doctrine. The Christian canon is partly an inheritance of the sacred texts esteemed by first-century Jewish communities, the writings which now comprise the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. But the Christian canon is also comprised of specifically Christian texts about Jesus, the beginnings of the Church, and writings attributed to the apostles and their associates. It is these writings which make up the New Testament as we have it today. The story of the making of the New Testament canon not only invites us to a journey through ancient manuscripts and heated debates of the early church, but also offers a window into the very heart of early Christian identity. The early church was devoted to Jesus, in both their worship and their teachings, with particular interest in Jesus' words, his life, death, resurrection, and exaltation. Any text that gave people access to the memory of Jesus, whether his sayings or accounts of his miracles, attracted interest and varied degrees of veneration. At the same time, there was also a steep interest in the followers of Jesus, his disciples, the apostles who proclaimed Jesus and established churches. As the apostles were the companions of Jesus, any writings attributed to them and any writing that conveyed stories about them also attracted interest. The early church was then primed to be interested in any writing that gave them access to Jesus and the apostles. Among Christian communities of the 2nd century, many writings became instantly popular. Among them were the 4 Gospels, the 13 epistles of Paul plus Hebrews, as well as 1 Peter and 1 John. Other texts, such as the Revelation of John, 2 Peter, the epistles of James, Jude, and 2nd and 3rd John, did find a significant number of readers. But some people had concerns about the authenticity of their authorship, and questions about the validity of their teachings. In any case, these writings would eventually be included in the New Testament, even if they took longer to garner a consensus about their origins and value. In effect then, the basic architecture for the New Testament canon was already established by the end of the 2nd century. That said, there were several other writings that became very popular and circulated widely too. Texts such as the Shepherd of Hermas, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, the Apocalypse of Peter, the Acts of Peter, the Gospel of Peter, the Epistle of Barnabas, the Didache, 1 Clement, and Tatian's Diatessaron. Many of these texts were well-known, highly regarded, and in some cases can even be found in lists and collections beside the texts that became part of the New Testament. By the 2nd century, the landscape of Christian literature had expanded immensely. There was something of an explosion of Christian writings in the 2nd century. Various texts claiming apostolic origin circulated among communities, each contributing to the theological and cultural tapestry of early Christianity. Certain groups such as the Valentinians offered their own interpretation of the Gospels and Paul's letters, even as they composed their own writings, such as the Gospel of Truth and the Apocryphon of John. In the case of the Marcionites, they preserved a highly edited version of the Gospel of Luke. They assembled a collection of Paul's epistles without the pastoral letters, composed a book called Antitheses, which contrasted the Jewish scriptures with the teachings of Jesus, as well possessing their own book of Psalms. In some quarters, like Syria, Tatian's Gospel Harmony, the Diatessaron, stood in place of the Gospels as the primary text used to access the story of Jesus. Plus, it was probably a Jewish Christian author in Syria who composed the Gospel of Thomas to fashion a more esoteric interpretation of the sayings of Jesus. It is interesting too that it was not until the 7th century that the Peshitta, the Syriac translation of the New Testament, included all of the Catholic epistles as part of its collection of Christian writings. Generally, there was an openness to reading any text that might provide someone with information about Jesus. This is why Clement of Alexandria in the 2nd century and Origen in the 3rd century were willing to read and inspect almost any book that claimed to preserve reliable information about Jesus. It was for the same reason that Bishop Serapion of Antioch initially permitted the church in Rossus to study the Gospel of Peter. He only later forbade it when it was found to be conducive to the heresy of Docetism, the belief that Jesus did not have a real physical body. But openness was the general disposition to any text that allegedly contained access to Jesus. Evidently then, the 2nd century was a time of literary industry, when the borders between orthodox and unorthodox texts was blurry, when many writings attributed to the apostles were in circulation, and there was no central authority who had a formal list of approved and prohibited Christian books. Why were certain books included and some books excluded? The abundance and variety of Christian literature did elicit some critical responses, with apologists writing critiques of some texts, such as the Gospel of Judas, and against Marcion's revamped Gospel. The diversity and disparity among the extant writings meant that there was eventually cause for Christian leaders to discern which writings they believed properly contained authentic accounts of Jesus, and which books had invented another Jesus who was unrecognizable to them. Similarly, many leaders believed that they had to establish which were the authentic writings of the apostles to be distinguished from the books which had corrupted the apostolic message for their own peculiar ends. From the 2nd to the 4th centuries, lists of authorized texts were drawn up, such as those found in the Muratorian Canon and the anti-Marcionite prologues. These lists identified the books that were regarded as authentically apostolic and consensually Catholic. They offered commentary on the apostolic origins of these books, and distinguished them from forged texts and those tainted with alleged false teaching. The 4th century marked a significant epoch in the canonization of the New Testament. Around 325, Eusebius of Caesarea completed his ecclesiastical history, where he referred to the incovenanted books. Those books that were considered true and genuine because they met certain criteria. These criteria were: first, apostolicity, was the book written by an apostle or an apostolic companion? Second, antiquity, can the book be reliably dated to the apostolic era? Third, orthodoxy, did the book agree with generally agreed teachings? And fourth, Catholicity, was the book used widely in the churches of the East and West? Eusebius knows of some writings that were disputed. Among these he lists the Acts of Paul, the Shepherd of Hermas, the Epistle of Barnabas, the Didache, and the Gospel of the Hebrews. These writings were contested yet familiar to most church writers. Interestingly, Eusebius says that the revelation of John is normally regarded as canonical, even though he personally thinks it should be treated as a disputed work. So the categories can be slippery. In addition, Eusebius refers to spurious books that were forgeries, heretical, filled with impious and absurd fictions, and were never approvingly cited by leaders of the earlier generations. Among these spurious writings were the Gospel of Thomas and Gospel of Peter, as well as the Acts of Andrew and Acts of John. Another landmark in the process of canonization was Bishop Athanasius's 39th Festal Letter, written in 369, which set out the list of authorized books for the churches of Alexandria and Egypt. This letter makes mention of the 27 books in the New Testament as we have it. Subsequent church councils held in Hippo Regius in 393 and Carthage in 397 offered an identical list of authorized books. The process of canonization not only shaped the theological contours of ancient Christianity, but also defined the set of texts that would inspire, challenge, and guide millions around the world. In sum, by the end of the 4th century, consensus had been reached as to which books should be included in the New Testament canon. As we have seen, that process was complex. It was not a matter of tracking down inspired books and adding them to a catalog of infallible writings, nor was it a top-down process by church authorities. More properly, The canon was formed according to the emerging consensus as to which writings, among the many available, conveyed the story of Jesus as the churches knew him, and resonated with the apostolic gospel as the churches proclaimed it. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and check out other videos on the channel. Until next time.